Hey guys, thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're interested in getting some more Photoshop hints and tips for your own workflow. Today we're going to be looking at how I did this floating bottle pour and how we went from this to the final image. So let's jump into Photoshop and see exactly how it was done. Okay guys, how you doing? We are here in Photoshop looking at our original shots, which look like this. This clearly being a giveaway that my bottle isn't floating. And this is the final shot, final edit. So I'm going to just quickly walk you through the techniques that I used to put this together. And I'm not going to be giving any kind of major tutorials about frequency separation or any of the color grading stuff that I did. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, or I'll be adding additional tutorials about frequency separation, color grading, masking, using the pen tool, blah blah blah. So if you're interested in that stuff, just subscribe, hit the little bell button, and you'll get a notification next time I post. So okay, let's start from the bottom. I'm going to turn everything off quickly and it will look a little bit dull and then a little bit invisible. Now here's my composite. Let's turn the composite folder on. I left this in here so I could show you guys exactly how it was put together from the beginning. So we've got the original shot, pretty dull looking with the lights. I like the light on the bottle. The bottle is what it's all about. So we started off by setting up the lights on the bottle. This is our hero object. So this is lit how we want it. Not perfect light falling on the fruit and the bottle cap. So we added, I should state we did the background removal. Obviously this was just done with the pen tool. Still got the path, I think. Here we go. So that was drawn with the pen. And then we made a mask out of it and then filled it with content aware stuff, which wasn't perfect, but then we went on to do a little bit of extra work just to hide the fact that it had been content aware filled. Photoshop does a really good job, but it's not perfect, so a little bit of extra work done there. And then you can see here I'm holding the why's that path keep coming back in? I don't like that. It's ghost path. I'm holding the bounce card in the shot. You can just see in the thumbnail here, just to bounce a little bit of that light back onto the bottle cap, and then the second time just to bounce the light back onto the fruit. Hang on, I know how to get rid of this. No, I totally don't. I don't know why that path won't go away. Let me. I'm going to delete the path. Get out of here. Yeah, that did the job. That did the job. Okay, right. Next, gin. I've got to be totally honest with you guys, because it's important that you know that nobody's perfect. When you look on YouTube, especially if you're seeing a tutorial, I mean, this is just a layer walkthrough, so you can see how it all came together. But if you're watching a tutorial, you always end up feeling like everybody knows what they're doing apart from you. Well, at this point, obviously, I've put in some gin. But I'm going to be totally honest with you. Didn't happen like that. The gin was the very last thing to be added after I'd done the whole of the composite and the color grading. I sat back to enjoy looking at my image and realized there was no gin in the bottle, and I was an idiot. So happens to everybody. Everybody can be stupid on some days, and this was mine. So anyway, what I had to do was this. You can see all I've done, because I don't want to have to mask the position of the bottle in. We did like 100 pours. So I've taken the pour that's got the nicest level of liquid in and matches the angle closely enough for me to just about clone in, or blend in, sorry, the surface tension. So just the area where the water is touching the side of the bottle, because that was quite easy for me to match up without having to do any transforming or anything like that. So once I've done that, I've then just added a little bit of dodge and burn. This is called sharpening when it's not sharpening. It's a dodge and burn layer. I think it was put together by an action, so I've just clicked the action and it's run, and it's got a stupid name. But essentially it's just a mid-grey layer set to soft light, and then above it I've got a levels layer where I have decreased the darkness of the blacks. So if I do this, you'll see that suddenly gets the opposite, sorry, I've made it blacker. I've added more contrast. If I move the midpoint, you'll see that I'm kind of fooling around with the gin. So this is just adding to this, the contrast to this layer and trying to get a balance just right. So that's that. This is real pixels. The surface tension, I wouldn't have been able to fake that very easily at all, but everything underneath that just needed to be a shade darker. So it's just been slightly darkened, job done. Now, above that, we've got all of our splashes. I'm going to turn them on, but you can see there are hundreds more splashes, loads of splashes and loads of pours. And that's the thing about splash photography, is that you just have to do loads and choose the ones that you like. Just having a quick look, quite like that, but it's just not dynamic enough. It's not got enough energy coming forwards. So we did loads and loads and loads of pours. And you can see as well, actually, we were using Speedlights. And although if you look on YouTube, you'll see lots of people going, you can do this with Speedlights. The brightness levels are clearly inconsistent, aren't they? From one to the next, you can see there's an inconsistency there, right? Most of the time they're this sort of darker blue. This is a bit darker, this is a bit lighter. Not as consistent as studio strobes. So I had a real nightmare with these pours using Speedlights. And that incidentally is what these additional, the pour that we chose, all the splashes that we chose. See, this is these splashes just here. If we zoom in, these little splashes here, these droplets, they are not quite the correct shade. So they've had to have hue, saturation and levels added to them so that they actually fit in with the image. So I, for one, won't be trusting my Speedlights with this kind of work again. Okay, now finishing moves. This is called finishing moves because it's an action that I've got called finishing moves. It adds sharpening. It's a good idea if you're going to use high pass sharpening, I should say. High pass sharpening is the standard method for sharpening that people use. You'll see it all over YouTube when people are doing tutorials. Everyone's going to use high pass sharpening, and that's fine. It's a good idea though to pop it into a smart object and then run your high pass filter as a smart filter, and that way you can always come in and change the level of the sharpening as you wish. So that's my sharpening, a little bit of additional contrast, just a little S-curve, nothing major, and then levels. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know I always do this. I'm going to take my levels and just slide in and make sure that a couple of my pixels are just reaching the absolute limit of their value. There's a couple of green pixels there that have got a value of 255, a couple of red pixels that have got a value of 255. So this is what it would be like without, and I just slide down until I've got a little bit of clipping. That way I know I'm using the full dynamic range, and obviously I'm changing all the values by fiddling with this, so it's starting to look a little bit aggressive, but let me just work through and then I'll bring up the final edit before we finish. So that's my finishing moves, my standard finishing moves that I put on everything. And then we've got color correction. So the color correction, a couple of different things we've done here. Let's turn them all off and we'll add them in one at a time. Firstly, light and green. It's actually the cyans, I think this is done in. Oh, maybe not. Is it done in the yellows? There we go. It's actually done in the yellow. So it's just the sort of crossover between the yellows and the greens. It's hue saturation, just adding a little bit of lightness. As you add lightness, you tend to lose saturation. So I've added a bit of saturation into compensate, and my green's just a little bit lighter and it pops a bit, and it also has quite a nice effect on my lime. So I could have masked it off those limes, but I quite liked it. So there it is. This is just a very subtle pop of vibrance. I liked what it did to the background, and it's just done with the vibrant slider. On top of this, we've got light and midtones, and it's just a standard curves layer, just pushed up a little bit just to bring my midtones up and make the whole image a little bit lighter. And then finally, reds and greens. Now this layer is something that you don't see that often in Photoshop tutorials, and it's selective color. And it tends to be a little bit confusing for people, and I think that's why. So what I've done is gone to my green channel and pulled some of the magenta out of my green channel, added some yellows, and then pulled the blacks out. Now by pulling blacks out of my green channel, I'm actually lightening my green channel. If I add blacks in, I'm darkening my green channel, and so on. Same thing is true for these other colors. If I add in magenta, it's going to go a little bit more sort of cyan, and if I pull it out, it's a little bit more sort of yellowy green. So you can mix your individual channels, you can mix your greens, you can mix your reds to be a more fine-tuned sort of hue. So again, with my reds, if I add in a lot of magenta, they're going to get a bit sort of cartoony, almost like a hot pink. If I pull that down, it goes all the way to green because you need magenta in your red channel. And again, I can darken just my reds or lighten just my reds by adding or removing black. So that was done. On top of that, we've then got a gradient fill in the background. I've masked this out, so I've had to do that with the pen tool. And this is just a standard gradient. There's nothing clever about it. It is what it is. Radial gradient, placed just here, and just drag it and move it around. So it's a standard gradient layer, and it's been masked and set to screen mode, so it just lightens everything, but it can't affect the bottle or the pour, so it's just lighting my background. On top of that, blue is green, blue is yellow. I absolutely could not decide on which was the best combination of colours, so I fooled around with that forever. Went to some friends, asked for some advice from other people, and then put all three up on my Instagram. Whatever, it's Photoshop, it's free, do what you like. Okay, and then finally, no more banding. Now, no more banding is a slightly more complex way of getting rid of the banding that you might have in an image that you've done gradient work on and that kind of stuff. If you put in fake gradients, you might get banding. Often, photographers, including myself, will just put a grain filter over the top, just add a bit of noise to a mid-grey layer, and that's enough to take care of it. But no more banding is an action that is just slightly more complex. And if you're interested in how that works, drop me a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll pop something up in the future so you can kind of check that out. Banding, obviously, absolute worst thing about working in Photoshop, CGI, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is a really good cure. Oh, guys, I missed a couple of layers before the finishing moves. I'm really sorry about this. Let's zoom back in. We did some frequency separation, and it was just for cleaning things up. We just cleaned things up a little bit. Now, the color balance is changing because I fooled around with all the values of my stuff, didn't I? But all that happened on this frequency separation layer was that we got rid of the screw at the bottom, and we just cleaned up any speckles of dust on the bottle, so there was really nothing there. Well, I'll use frequency separation for a lot of more CG type stuff that I do, but in this case, not a lot. Just a bit of cleaning and a bit of blurring on the background without losing the grain of the image, the natural grain of the image. And finally, just a very subtle touch of field blur. Felt like this was too sharp. It just looks a bit too sharp. The depth of field that I chose when I set my camera up, it's just not quite giving it that sort of realistic edge. So I've used field blur just to add that slight blur to the furthest edge of the bottle, and it graduates in down this edge. Now, if you haven't used a field blur filter, I recommend you just get it up on any image and play with it. It's brilliant. Once you know that it's there and what you can do with it, it's always there as a tool in the back of your mind if you need to use it. With any Photoshop tool, use it sparingly, but knowing that it's there, it's a lifesaver a lot of the time. Now, before we finish, I just want to show you this. This is my solar curve, and the solar curve is this. So you can set one up. I have an action, obviously. It only takes a moment to set up a solar curve. You just make a curve and throw a few bits through points on it, to the extremes, and you get this. And you might be looking at this and thinking, well, what the hell is the point in that? Well, the answer to that is the slightest speck of dirt on your piece of paper will show up under a solar curve. So maybe if I turn everything off and we just look at the original composites, look at all this mess. Look at all this mess. And this is the grain in the paper in the background. Now, you can't see this with the naked eye, but it's there. And once you send this off to a printer, there's every possibility that this is going to start to show up in the print and mess it up. So, can't turn everything on, can I? Because I've got some stupid layers in here. Okay, so solar curve, very, very useful visualization tool just to make sure that everything is clean and tidy and you haven't missed anything. Now, if you're shooting models on an infinite white background, an infinity wall, something like that, I'd recommend you bang this solar curve on your infinity wall and look for footprints, trainer scuffs, that kind of stuff on the floor, and just quickly get rid of them. You'll be happy that you did down the road. Okay, so any questions about solar curve, drop them in the comments. Obviously, any questions about anything that I've done here, drop them in the comments and I will get back to you. And if you want to see any more, hit the subscribe, hit the little bell, and you'll see the next video that I pop out. Okay, cheers guys, see you next time.